So I'm really working on trying to narrow the test down. I don't want to overwhelm you, but I'm kind of stuck in this weird position where I got to get through the French. I got to get to the French Revolution. We're doing pretty good though, considering that how much longer everything has taken, and I've had to kind of bounce around more than I normally would have. We're doing pretty good. We're going to French Revolution and Napoleon. We'll set up the Industrial Revolution, and we should be able to do a really good job on World War I and World War II. And so I'm really pleased with that. Cross fingers. Okay, so so we're talking about the three different types of government. Don't forget, Montesquieu grew up in Louis XIV and Louis XV reign, so he saw absolute monarchs, where they had complete control over all political processes: judicial, executive, and judicial, legislative, and executive. And so what he wanted was a separation of powers. And this has got to be more and more. There's going to be movement for a constitution that will lay this out. Now, of course, this is going to be very difficult to do, and one branch of this, and he knew it, will always be powerful, more powerful. This is not equality of powers. The person who interprets and carries out the laws, the executive, that is the big power. And he knew it. Let me get my pointer. I like having the pointer. Okay. So while this is going on, there's a real movement. Okay, there's been historians before, but the real idea of a philosopher who is a specific historian is an Enlightenment idea. And the most famous of this would be Edward Gibbon, who would write this 6-volume voluminous work called The Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire. And what he's doing is he's doing the important thing that historians do. He is using Rome and what happened in Rome and lessons we could learn to point out contemporary problems in England. He's saying, look at these things that happened in Rome, and we can come up with the very same problems here unless we do some kind of reform. And so he would write this out as a lesson. I've never read all 6 volumes. I had to read an abridged work for a history of Rome class. It's a pretty amazing history. People still use Gibbon, but he made some mistakes, and the prose style, there's no grammatical rules. So you have a whole page that's one sentence. It's just very awkward to read. But this first real look at history and what history is for. Yes, stories, there's great entertaining people, there's amazing characters. All of that is important. But the big thing about history is we need to use history to predict, or to use it to, in a way, kind of predict our future, to lay out what we should do using historical practices and lessons from the past. And we have no way to look to the future except to the past. It also defines who we are. So speaking of that, in a more later Enlightenment, as kind of a reaction to Voltaire in some ways, David Hume, who I struggled reading Hume. I'd read him in a philosophy class, and I really struggled with him. But Hume would write that in his Natural History of Religion, don't worry so much about the title of the book, but get down this idea that people aren't rational. The age of reason doesn't work. They base their decisions upon desire, upon what they want at that moment. They're a turbulent mass. And so natural law won't be able to solve the problem. But in the same vein, he thought religion could not either. Religion was based upon fear. And so he was more of a cautionary tale towards the Enlightenment, that people aren't necessarily based upon reason. This is a little bit of a Hobbesian approach. So you see an element, it's a reaction to Voltaire, but it's also a reaction to Voltaire saying, okay, we can come up with a few leaders based upon reason. And Hume is saying, no, 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 no. People will do things based upon their own personal need. Next, maybe. And then Immanuel Kant. Now, Immanuel Kant was a very famous historian who, don't write down the 3 books, The Critique of Pure Reason, What is the Enlightenment, and Metaphysical Foundations of Natural Science. I've had to read parts of Critique of Pure Reason. It's really an interesting book, but he too is another reaction against some of the elements of the Enlightenment. And if you look at that forehead, that's not a forehead, that's a 5, 6, or 7 head. And I think he might be alien. I'm just throwing this out there. There's this movie from the 1950s called This Planet Earth, and all the aliens look like that. I don't know. I'm just saying ancient aliens. Maybe that whole thing is true. But his big idea is a couple different things. First off, by the way, look at that head, right? That's alien. That is somebody trying to be human, but not quite getting the picture right. Anyways, dare to know as much knowledge as possible. There's nothing you should be afraid of. When I mean dare to know is this concept of don't be afraid of pushing the boundaries of knowledge. But he also believed in something that we call transcendentalism. And this is the beginnings. We'll see him as the beginnings of what's called the Romantic era. Not everything is empirical. Not everything is mathematical. And we should go back to nature. And nature, nature. Hey, give me a break. We should go back to nature. This idea that nature has lessons, and some things are maybe more spiritual. And so he had a complex idea. So this is pushing back that we can have a planet completely based upon pure reason. And so time and space is not completely decided by empirical means. There are things we cannot understand or we can only think through. So he is definitely a combination of really basing himself on this deductive reasoning of Descartes. Also, it's relative. This is an idea that was developing through philosophers at that time, that what we see now might be different than what other people might observe. And we're coming to relativity. But he had two basic ideas, the priori and the posteriori, the reason and empirical, and was basically this: we must try to go beyond just what we see and think about it, transcend our senses and go to what we can know or think about. And there are concepts that are not mathematical, like faith, or think about, what are we before we're born and what happens after we die? Pre-existence and life after death. And this definitely has the influence of Calvin, doesn't it? Because Calvin laid out this idea that it is predetermined at birth. And so Kant is going through all of this. So Kant really is a reaction to the empirical. He's beginning the Romantic era. We're starting to see a backlash against this almost immediately, as we see it with almost every idea. But boy, that is a forehead. I'm still trying to ponder that one. He used the power of his mind to control people. And so, one more person, the Marquis, which is basically like, it's a nobleman, the Marquis de Condorcet. He, a French philosophe, and you notice he died in the middle of the French Revolution, but his book came out right after he died. It's a pretty amazing work. Okay, I've not read the whole thing, but I've had to read parts of it. And he is another reaction against the Enlightenment. And he laid this out as, yes, reason is important, but we can come to a situation where we can have a utopian vision of universal happiness. This is, life does not have to be constant struggle, constant strife. Now, what exactly that means is going to be much more complex. But every individual, if you use reason, I don't know why I put true independence, but I did. You can enjoy some sense of true happiness and true independence. And this really kind of fits in with the idea of natural rights. That I meant to put true happiness. I must have been thinking about something else when I typed that. But this kind of fits in with that idea of Locke's natural rights. But it's not a Hobbesian view. Not the idea that everybody is brutish and cold, or it's not even really, it's not even Hume. It's not even Kant, really. This is the idea that we can have a perfect world. So he has definitely a utopian vision. And therefore, he believed There should be free, universal education. We should have constitution, and this fit in with some of the more left-wing elements in the French Revolution. There should be equal rights for women. He also was anti-slavery, wanted equal, or thought the whole idea of race was ridiculous, that all people should be equal. He was another reaction to the Enlightenment idea, where men like Voltaire thought only a few people could actually understand knowledge, the enlightened despot, or Montesquieu, we have to separate everybody because we can't trust them, to we can have this perfect world. It can, not really perfect, but we can have a world where everybody has independence, freedom, and is treated as human beings. Yeah, I know, crazy stuff. I kind of like Condorcet. And then the last, Rousseau. And it's hard really to go into full-scale Rousseau. In fact, I think I'm going to have to finish with Rousseau. Sorry. Rousseau. So Rousseau is a little bit after Voltaire, and he shows a shift. The world was changing fast. And yes, he died before the French Revolution, but his handprints will be all over the French Revolution. And in governments in the future, he will be used as the basis. Oh, you don't need to write, don't worry about Discourse of Science and Arts or Emile. Just write the social contract. That's the only one you need to know, the social contract. Sorry about that. His fingerprints are going to be all over the French Revolution, but also over totalitarianism. Rousseau is everything from to justify socialism to justify authoritarianism. I'm not sure what to think of Rousseau, but his influence will be huge, in many ways much bigger than Voltaire. And a lot of people will think about Rousseau and use Rousseau ideas that Rousseau started and not realize they're using Rousseau. So the social contract's the one we need to know. And so let's get to a few things about his philosophy. And of course, I use the philosophy by showing him with a bunch of swans, because of course. And does progress in the arts and science correspond with progress and morality? So when I mean arts and sciences, he's talking about the amazing changes in Baroque and Rococo art. He's talking about the scientific revolution. He's talking about the Enlightenment. All these amazing ideas. Do people become more moral with these enlightened ideas, with the scientific revolution? Are people more moral as they come up with new ways to develop things? And when he is writing this, he is reading about and hearing about something that is radically different that's happening in Britain, the Industrial Revolution. And his answer is no. This is actually making us, or it is hurting human society. How? Morality declines as civilization progresses. And what proof did he have? This is a lot of Descartes sitting around and pondering this. But his vision and what he heard about primitive, now this is the point of view of him, but primitive societies going back thousands of years, is they were more equal, people had more rights, they loved each other more, they cared for their families and each other, but as society progressed, they become greedy and become selfish. And he saw the same thing with what he heard about American Indians. They had great liberty, and what happened to them when the Europeans arrived. And so science and art raise these barriers. So there's a gap now, a barrier between the people and their natural state. So the natural state of people being together, coming up with solutions, and now we put a bunch of artificial laws and limits and fake reality, fake virtues, fake morality. And there's an element of truth, as we have seen all throughout history. How society becomes more civilized, what's the next thing they do? They're creating armies and mutilating and butchering each other. And therefore, science and arts actually corrupted morals, not improved them. Now, is this true? Is this false? But it's pretty radical stuff. And this is why I look at Rousseau and go, wow, this took guts to say. Because part of the Enlightenment when it first started is our mind and our reason will solve all the world's problems. And now it's saying by trying to solve the problems, you're making things worse. And, think about it for just 1 second when you think about all this empirical reason in science, with climate change. these scientific advancements are potentially destroying the world. And so this is a pretty interesting element. And naturally, that's why Rousseau would be surrounded by geese. Perfect. And so let's get to the second part. By the way, I really like that statue. It's in Paris. Yeah, I like that. That's a cool one. So the concept of virtue, of being a virtuous human being, that only happens in the state of nature. But once you have a society, aka civilization, its laws, and norms and attitudes are put on you. So we want to go back to the state of nature, but the point is, obviously, we can't do it. By the way, isn't there a big element of Kant there? There's an element of other philosophers there too. And so if we're going to have a government, the governments must be in such a way to not restrict people and to preserve virtue and liberty. Now, once again, we can all define what that's different, but government must preserve that. But there's a problem with this. How can government do this and preserve individual liberty and virtue if everyone's in competition? This is where we start getting a little bit weird. And so this is his famous quote. You've probably heard this before. If you can't read it, it says, "Man is born free, yet everywhere he is in chains." And this is the concept of the noble savage. And we'll hear this a lot in the 19th century, like, for example, the United States would talk about this for American Indians. European colonizers would talk about this in Africa or Asia. This idea that they're noble, but they're still savages. And what happens is government puts people in chains. How do we break those chains? This is where Rousseau gets very interesting. But what government should preserve: liberty, equality, and fraternity. So free will for all, equality for all people. But what does that mean? And fraternity. Fraternity means all people together as a group. This is the slogan of France to this day. So you go to France, or Ministry of Justice, or everywhere, it's liberty, fraternity, and equality. So it is like life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, but isn't it a little bit different? There's no equality in life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And fraternity implies we're all in this together. So if we're going to have liberty in society, all rights and liberty, we must invest, we must put everybody have rights, everybody has liberties. This must be injected into society for all. So that's what Rousseau is saying. Now, so he's trying to return to the state of nature while still having a government. He's trying to have men born free, yet there's still chains. Do you see the issue with Rousseau? I'm fascinated by this because he is clear. This is somebody who is sitting there thinking about the best way. And how do we do this? And when people are going to read this and say, okay, Rousseau is saying this, how do I adapt this to something like the French Revolution? I think you can see where this is a problem is going to be. So this is where he lays out in the wonderful work, The Social Contract. The right government can make people free. If you have a good, correct government, the government can make people free. But how? Well, you can't really do it technically for each individual. So government must achieve moral freedom to have people sacrifice their individual interests for what's called the general will. So they sacrifice their individuality for the will of the people, the liberty, the virtues, the morality of all the people. And so we're not individual people with individual will. We all have will, freedom. We all have virtues. We have morality. And this fits in with the equality issue. We're all in this together, and the fraternity part. The fraternity, as we're not one individual, we're a group of people. So like in France, liberty, fraternity, or liberty, equality, and fraternity, all the French. But do you see an issue with this? You're not, what does this mean? You're not an individual anymore. It's the general will. And who decides the general will? And what if you don't believe in the general will? And so what he said was the rulers are, or this, there's a contract where all the people agree together, not the people and the rulers, which is a Lockean idea that the United States would be based upon. It is the people come together and they come up with an agreement, a contract, aka a constitution, and then they pick the rulers, technically. But do they pick them? Because he just said there's no individual interest, there's a general will. And so this whole social contract, this issue, is based solely on human nature, how we react. And so history is not a determinant of this. Tradition, it's not the Bible, it's not religion, it's how humans behave, which, by the way, is totally contrary to the way humans behave, because they look at history, tradition, and Bible, and he's thinking we can get above this. Let's break away from society and go to this natural state, the noble savage, and then we come up with this tradition. So remember what he's saying. History, tradition, and religion corrupt people. And so lastly, last thing. Okay, there's a large group of women walking by my window. Which is good, I'm glad they're walking. But therefore, what we need is a Republican form of government with direct democracy. And what direct democracy means is this: not only do people choose their leaders, but the people also vote on laws. In the United States, some of you might remember this or know about this, states have, like Montana, a referendum or an initiative where people propose laws and vote on them. He wanted more of that. Now, this by definition is going to limit the size of the government or the country, because you can only have so many elections for things, but he wanted the people as a group. Now you notice what he's talking about here then is majority rule. It's not individuals making their rights, it's the people making their rights. And we will force them to be free in the social contract. We will require people to become free members of society. By the way, I think you might see some elements of this. Therefore, there's no legal protection for individual rights. It's only the general will. And this would have massive influence. So the revolutionaries after 1789 at first would use Rousseau as saying the general will is for the people of France to destroy the monarchy. And then later revolutionaries will say the general will is for the people of France to destroy those against the revolution. And then it would turn into it is the will of the people, the general will, to guillotine the enemies of the people. He would also, by this general will together in attacking private property, communists. The new communists that will come out of the Industrial Revolution, for example, Karl Marx was greatly influenced by it. Do you get the point? He's all over the place. And so his general will, and I did not put this down. Ooh, why didn't I write this down? I meant to. I'm going to type this in. I thought I did. And totalitarians. People like Hitler, who talked about the mass of people working together for perfect fascism. Well, that's the general will. And so is he a socialist? Is he a fascist? Is he a revolutionary? Rousseau, it's hard to find someone with more influence. So after saying that, I guess I like Rousseau. By the way, here is somebody at, there's Rousseau and all the different good and bad elements that come out, as he sees it, the tree of humanity. Okay, so everything from envy, vanity, fear, inequality, but liberty is growing from it. I like that one. Okay, So I didn't quite get as far as I wanted. We'll do the Enlightened Monarchs tomorrow. The quiz should drop. Sorry, I went a little bit shorter. I'm just tired. And then I gotta run to the I gotta go back to the I got an appointment. So on that note, if there's no questions, I will see. Oh, the quiz should drop. I think it already did. How's the
Mr.
quiz?
Partridge,
Yeah.
I have a really big question.
Yeah.
What font do you use in your PowerPoints?
This one?
Yeah.
It's called Village Font. And there was this really kind of crazy British show from the 1960s called The Prisoner. And it's just this wild show about the secret agent that I like, but it's pretty wild. And all he's forced to live in this village, and all the font is from that series. Somebody made that font.
Oh, really?
And it's a pretty wild series. It was on Netflix, but I don't think it's on now. Netflix rotates things. But it's a pretty wild show, and I found the font and I like it. So that's what I use for everything. And so if you like it, look up The Village. So at least act like you like it.
I will.
All right, any more questions? The quiz should drop any second now. So you can quick go do that one. And I got to take off, so I'll see you tomorrow.
Yeah, have a good day.